Yes, you're listening to Walking My Shoes FM. Do tweet us at #WimsFM, and loads of brilliant presenters coming up, and Pat O'Mahony, as we said. We've got Blonde Tracy later, Aveen McCall, Keith Barry's coming in. Magic, yeah.
Paddy,
I could keep going, but you know what? I'm not, because we got some guests in the studio, Laura.
It is a big week on Wims FM. You're dead right, Dustin. This is a fascinating story, and I've been looking forward to chatting to Scott Riley, who's the founder of Causeway Living.
Really?
All morning? Yes.
No, you have to go, right, oh dear. Laura, okay, do it again now. So, wait till you hear this, Scott. This is hilarious. Wait till you hear this. Read it again, Laura.
This is a fascinating story. I'm
say his name.
Serious. Scott Riley is the founder of Causeway.
No, then I go. You go Scott Riley, right? Do it again and stop at Scott
You're
Riley.
Scott Riley.
Really?
Oh, Riley.
Oh, Riley. Yeah, well, see what I did there, Scott.
We could go on.
Good enough.
We could go on for hours like this. But Scott, pleasure to have you with us today. And we're going to be talking about Causeway Living in just a few minutes. But first of all, can you take us back to the period about 2013, 2014, to I suppose what you might consider your lowest point to date?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, back in June 2014, I was still 100 pounds overweight, 100 pounds heavier than you see me sitting here, and suffering from a chronic illness called rheumatoid arthritis. So bad times, it's fair to say. And sometimes it's even to be sat here right now, it almost feels a bit surreal talking about positive mental health, because really not all that long ago I was so overweight, so sick, and in a really, really bad place. So
100 pounds overweight. I mean, you walked into studio, and for people listening at home, you look incredibly fit and healthy.
You do. You could pass for me. You look really well, actually. You could, Scott.
You've aged slightly better than Dustin. But you do, and so is it hard to associate yourself of now with yourself of 4 years ago?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and that's sort of what I was touching on before. Sometimes there's, people tell me, you look so fit, look so healthy, and there is a bit of a catch-up to play because it's such a transformation over such a short period of time. But yeah, just
constant work in progress, I'd imagine.
Exactly.
Which is the right way. We don't want everything to happen at once. You decided to look at a couple of radical, I suppose you could say, alternative ways to lose the weight. Was that number one in your priority list? Let's shed the weight and move on to the next stage.
Truthfully, it wasn't, to be honest. I was suffering so much with the chronic illness, rheumatoid arthritis, and for anyone that doesn't know, that's an autoimmune condition, and once you're diagnosed with that, you're not really supposed to get better.
It's not reversible, is it? Yeah.
No, that's exactly it. So I was suffering from the condition for about 4 years, and they tried all these different pharmaceutical drugs, and in one place, roughly about 2 years into this kind of period of time, they did find one pharmaceutical drug that worked for me, which was amazing at the time, but it almost hit me twice as hard then whenever that drug stopped working.
So was it because of the weight, or is it genetic that you had the rheumatoid arthritis?
Well, it's not really that well understood, to be honest. They suggested it might be stress induced, but yeah, it's not very well understood, and it's basically your immune system starts attacking your own body. And I kind of believe it's because it's not that well understood and stress induced. I kind of feel that up until that part in my life, there's a huge link between depression and rheumatoid arthritis, and I'd suffered on and off with depression throughout my teens, and it was a hard time for me as well. I found myself hiding away a lot from the world and just overworking, really.
And it's very understandable as well when somebody suffers from a chronic illness. Of course it's going to get you down, because you wake up in the morning and you're in pain, whatever that pain may be, and it's a struggle to get through the day and do the simplest things sometimes. Now, you did decide to take your health into your own hands. Talk to us about this juicing diet. I mean, it sounds very radical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I came across a couple of things. It got to the point where I was so ill and so overweight that I absolutely had to do something. I was looking at the next, because it's a chronic illness and not a terminal one, I was potentially going to have another 30, 40, 50 years living miserable and very sick. So I had to do something. The pharmaceutical drugs weren't working, and juice fasting was one of the first things that I came across. And at the same time, I came across plant medicine treatment in South America as well. Right. So I booked the trip to Peru, and because it was such an isolated place, it's Like you fly into Lima, the capital of Peru, and then fly to a city called Iquitos, which is, it's the biggest city in the world with no roads to it.
Did you bump into Paddington?
Paddington.
He's from Peru, isn't he? He is, Paddington Bear, that's him.
So was this a retreat that you booked into 6 months ahead of yourself? So you figured in 6 months' time, I want to be on this, and you had a goal of losing the weight at that point?
Yeah, so I booked that 6 months waiting period, and I wanted to kind of follow up that with action, really. That I booked this trip, but there was no good waiting around 6 months for that. So the other thing that I found, like you mentioned, was juice fasting. I watched a couple of documentaries. One of them was called Fat, Sick and Nearly Dead by an Australian guy called Joe Cross.
It's on Netflix, I've seen it.
It's brilliant, right? And he himself had a chronic illness as well. He had a psoriasis condition, and he managed to overcome that by going 60 days without eating anything, essentially just living on fruit and vegetable juices. And then the other documentary I watched was called Super Juice Me, and that came with a 28-day program. So I really liked the idea of having a nutritionally balanced program, and I liked what Joe did in the Fat, Sick, Nearly Dead documentary. So I did that back to back plus a few days to take it up to 60 myself. And really by the end of those 60 days, I'd lost a huge amount of the weight that I put on. I stopped taking the pharmaceutical drugs that I was taking at that time as well, because they weren't really having any effect for me either. And
so fast forward to 6 months later, you get to your retreat.
Sure.
You're in the Amazon. What's it like there? What happens?
It was incredible. It was probably the biggest turning point for me, to be honest. Just booking that trip was massive for me. And they actually have an indigenous belief, the tribes there believe that whenever you really set the intention to take the medicine that they treat you with out there, that it actually starts working. And in a roundabout way, I mean, you can look at it as I booked that trip and then followed it up with action, but really it did start working. By the time I went out to Peru, I was basically physically better. I wasn't suffering from the condition or the symptoms of my condition anymore, and I'd lost 90% of the weight that I put on. And
so you were feeling better in yourself anyway, but as you say, sometimes our mind needs to catch up with the physical changes that we go through.
100%. So I kind of felt physically better, and then I really used my time out in Peru to work on my mental health as well. And it was actually out in Peru and through connected. It was maybe my first experience with a big group of like-minded people who really supported me and all just wanted the best for themselves and each other. And that was just life-changing for me, really. And part of that and getting better myself, I felt inspired really to come back and help other people through things like community and maybe some alternative measures as well.
You wanted to give back a bit of what you got over there.
Exactly.
And listen, a shaman, one of the facilitators said to you when you were about to leave Peru, what did he say?
Yeah, I mean, what he sort of said was go out and be the medicine in the world. Not everyone can go to Peru, and for everyone who wants to change their lives, I don't want to tell them to have to get a chronic illness and get overweight and then do a juice fast and go to Peru. I want people to be able to inspire change in people's lives without them having to go through maybe some of the same difficulties that I went through. So,
and they may not be radical changes, or they may be huge changes to them, but feel insignificant to other people. So
exactly,
you have started up Causeway Living.
Yes.
Yeah, which is your own little bit of Peru, isn't it?
That's exactly it, yeah.
So what happens in Causeway Living?
Yeah, well, basically it's a health coaching company. So what the main focus is at the minute, really, a lot of it's about community. So I've been putting on retreats in the Mourne Mountains in Northern Ireland, taking small groups of people there for some hiking, some group bonding, and the interesting bit is cold exposure training as well.
Right, so I could be sitting in the Amazon in Peru, or I could be up the Mourne Mountains during the winter. Right, you're not selling it to me, Scott. You'll have to give me a bit more on this.
Just as transformative, though, Dustin, I can assure you.
So the cold swims, is it?
Yeah, exactly. So I teach breath.
It's like them happy pair boys, isn't it? They're always down, and where is it? The land of Labradoodle and Protestants, Greystones, and they're always jumping in the water every morning at 6:30, and people apparently love it.
But yeah, Scott, Dustin's right. They say that they just feel so alive and electrified after their cold water swim.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's so many benefits physiologically and psychologically for the cold water treatment, and then the breathwork training that I've been doing as part of my own recovery as well. I like to teach that on the retreats, and the cold is a great test of that, because it really teaches you to focus in and be mindful in the moment, because the second you start thinking oh no, it's cold, you start freaking out, it feels worse. But if you can really focus in on the breath and and use a bit of mindfulness in the water, you get into it a lot easier, and people come out the other side seeing that they can overcome something that they might have been scared of in the first place.
And so do people who go on these retreats with you, do they know each other, or do they start out as strangers?
Yes, at the minute I've had all maybe one couple of friends who's come along to it, but that's been one of the most amazing things, to be honest. People that start out as strangers and have since, on a couple of the retreats, I had a lady from the Netherlands come back to Ireland to run a 10k race with an Irish guy living in England. So they've all been like getting together afterwards and become friends after the retreats as well. And that's amazing for me to see, one, like that sense of community continues on beyond the end of the retreat, but also that the people take the lessons from the retreat and continue to keep active. And it was a big deal, especially one of the guys who was running the race, who in the first place, he came to the retreat in the first place feeling like he didn't have a lot of confidence in his body, and he'd suffered from a health condition as well, but in his own words, really found confidence in himself again after climbing Sleeve Donard up in the morns and getting in and out of the cold and proving to himself that he could do it. He's since gone on to run races, and it's amazing.
Plus, he just wanted to get out of there, Scott. Not getting in that water again. It's freezing.
Did his fastest time. Scott, we're sitting opposite you this morning. You seem very content with life, very happy.
Yeah, it's been a big 3 years, and I know it's going to be another big 3 years beyond this. It's only just the start, and I've just started recently as well, not just taking people to the morns, but in my own town. I wanted to get this out to as many people as possible. So for anyone who's in the Belfast or Bangor area, I've been putting on like a free run and swim in the sea every Sunday morning. So
there you go, Dustin.
There you go, Dustin.
I'm not a duck, I'm a turkey. Sorry, Scott, I'm busy that Sunday. No, look, horses for courses. I just, the cold, I like the warmth. Not oven warm now, mind you. I do like the warmth, Scott.
Well, continued success, Scott. Where can people get more information?
Yeah, absolutely. If people go to causewayliving.com, or if you search for Causeway Living on basically any social media platform, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you'll be able to learn more there.
Well, you've convinced me. I think Dustin will take a little more convincing that cold water is good for you. But a fascinating story, and thanks so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks so much, Laura.
Thanks
Dustin.
Scott Riley.
Cheers.
Time for really? Time for some music now.